Hello, I am Elowen and we are Emmengard, and we're here today to talk to you about plurality and art. And if you don't know who we are on Emmengard.com. We hang out a lot on Reddit and also on Twitter sometimes, though we're kind of new at that and not very good at it yet. Anyway, we are probably most well known in the community for doing the Blobbies comic, which is about the blob system, and they're coming to terms with their plurality. And so, yeah, that's what we do. And we do a lot of other things as well. We do oil paintings, and we do other comics, and we write, and yeah, that's what we do. That's who we are. And if you want to check out more of our work, you can find it on our website. So today we're going to be talking about art and plurality. And art is just really important. I think it's important for all people to be doing art. I think it's important for all people to have some sort of connection with art and an avenue for speaking their truth. And I mean art in a very broad sense. I don't just mean really fancy oil paintings that could hang in a gallery. I mean silly art too. Art that maybe your system kids might end up doing. Art like this. This is one of the very first things that Phyllis drew. And yeah, it was just really important to get the kids to start communicating and to start drawing and reaching out. And it was also a way for us to then show them how much we cared about them, because we would put their work up on the refrigerator. And I think that sort of helped in that early period to sort of build up communication and trust and all of those things that you really need in a system if it's going to work well and if everyone's going to get along. And yeah, here is another example of some art that we did early on in our discovery. This is Momo, and I actually made Momo. She has 4 legs, kind of like a half octopus or something, and yeah, she's just very adorable. And I made her based off of Phyllis's design for a monster stuffed animal. And this is what Phyllis had drawn. And this is what I made. I think I did pretty good. I've never made a stuffed animal before, but I think I did okay. And because I have never made a stuffed animal before, and I like the stuffed animals that are a bit heavier, I put beans in her, and I wish I hadn't, because when I wash her in the washing machine, the beans go everywhere, because I'm not an expert seamstress. And I did this all by hand. I don't have a sewing machine. I don't even know how to use a sewing machine. I just stitched this together by hand, and there's little holes where my stitching wasn't perfect, and the beans escape and they get all over my washing machine, and it drives me crazy. Lesson learned: if you're going to make a homemade stuffed animal and you've never made one before, don't use beans. Use just the stuffing fluff. But yeah, we all need creative avenues for self-expression. That's what we need. And it can be just an incredibly amazing tool for communicating with and connecting with your system mates, especially crafts. And drawings and cartoons and comics and all sorts of things. So I highly, highly encourage everyone, and not only systems, singletons as well. Everyone needs more art in their lives. And poetry as well. There is actually our favorite poet, Rumi. Rumi is our favorite poet. And Rumi has this really amazing thing that he says, which is that love is the bridge between you and everything. And I think that is what art reminds us of. So it reminds us of our shared humanity, it gives us perspective, and it gives us an avenue for speaking our truth. So that's why we should care about art. And what does that all mean when you are a system? And what does that mean for the plural community in general? well, in the community, we are kind of up against a lot of things, because the art that is out there that is about plurals is not very flattering or accurate. And I do think that the way that we are talked about in popular movies is very damaging. And I think it is damaging on a lot of different levels. And it's damaging first on that very personal level, where it can be internalized in a really negative way for systems on the individual basis. And then it's damaging on a community level, because I think it keeps us from reaching out to each other, and it keeps us from reaching out to other plurals, and it keeps us from seeking help. It took us so long to finally get help and get a therapist, just because we were so afraid of being plural and ashamed of what that would mean if we accepted that that was the truth. And so it just kept us in denial for a really long time. And even plurals who are outside, they're out of their denial and they've accepted that they're plural, I think that they still struggle with being open, reaching out to other people, finding therapists if they need a therapist for various things. I suppose not all plurals feel that they need a therapist, and that is okay. But I also think that there's a lot of times where plurals would like a therapist to help them with anxiety and maybe other things that are bothering them in their lives, and just because of the stigma that exists because of all of these terrible movies, they end up not seeking out help because they choose instead to just deal with their problems instead of having to face the stigma that we're up against. And that's really sad and really damaging. And it's because of this horrible portrayal of us in art. And so, as an artist, I am offended by the people who make those movies. It royally tweaks me off. And it's not a problem that we are up against alone. First of all, because we have a community and we're in this together, which is great. But also, we're not up against this on our own, because there's a lot of marginalized communities out there who are fighting their own stereotypes. And I think it's important to keep that in mind in this struggle, because we're not the only ones that are up against this kind of a cultural hegemony of mass media. So it's just kind of nice to know you're not the only ones out there struggling against something. And it's kind of interesting because we all know stereotypes are bad. We're like, yeah, stereotypes are bad, okay. But they're still just everywhere, and they kind of get in our heads, and they end up playing out in the stories that we tell about each other, in the stories that people tell about other people, and they end up having a really real world impact. And it makes society on the larger scale a worse place. So, someone who talks about this very eloquently is Malcolm Gladwell in his book Blink. I don't know if, there we go. And basically what he's talking about in this book is just how the stereotypes and the simplified version of who we think other people are ends up impacting how we think about the world and each other, and how that impacts our snap decisions and translates to broad disenfranchisement of different groups and these huge problems. And it's just these small minute-to-minute interactions that are based on these underlying stories that we have about other people that can lead to really huge consequences on the mass scale. And the solution that he kind of talks about is how you get out of that and how you break down that way of thinking on the larger societal scale is by building up familiarity with different groups of people so that you don't just have a simplified version of who those people are in your head. And Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie also speaks about this phenomenon in art very beautifully in her TED Talk, The Danger of the Single Story. And she is an author, and she's from Nigeria, and she talks about how the single story limits what you think about different groups of people, and it's not necessarily limited to any one group of people. But the example that she gave that I think sort of illustrates the point is when she went to college, her roommate, she went to college in the United States, and when she went to college, her college roommate thought that she was not going to speak any English, and she was expecting her to listen to tribal music and not Mariah Carey. And of course, English is one of the official languages of Nigeria, and Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie grew up speaking English, so she speaks perfect English, and the only music she brought was Mariah Carey. And so her college roommate had a single story of what Africa meant, and it was very limiting. And then when she went on to try to publish her stories about her experiences and about her life or about other people's lives in Africa, the feedback that she then got from her professors was that her stories were not genuinely African enough because they didn't fit into what they thought of as African either. So they too had a single story of what Africa is. And that also ends up becoming a problem when you think about trying to publish things or trying to get a TV show into production when you're talking to the heads of different networks and things like that. Those people who kind of decide what stories are published and what stories are getting put out there on a mass scale, they favor stories from those marginalized communities that reinforce the single story that they already have about that group. So they favor stories about Africa that look like what they already think of as Africa. And they favor stories about plurality and and dissociative identity disorder that already are telling this story about us as being we're scary, and it's very fantastical and not realistic. They favor those stories because that's already what they have in their heads about what it means to be plural. And that is a really harsh thing to be up against because it means we're in this uphill battle. And we're not just in an uphill battle against the people who decide what stories are told. We're kind of in an uphill battle against our own human nature, because choosing what is familiar and sort of sliding into the single story about any group of people is just sort of easy, and I think it's human nature to want to do that. I think it's the easy way out, and people just sort of stick to what they know, and they stick to what's comfortable, and they're just okay with that, and they just go with it. And it doesn't seem so bad when you say it like that, but it can lead to some really ugly stuff where there's a lot of ignorance and misinformation and misunderstanding. And so if we want to break out of that single story, we have to be better than that, because we're up against not only the curators of culture that decide who tells stories and about what, we're also up against just human nature and our own human nature, which is just to go with what's familiar and what's comfortable and what we know already. And if you want to change the world, as Gandhi says, you have to change yourself first. Be the change you wish to see in the world. So how do we break out of the single story? And a good way to start to do that is to just start reading stories and looking for art that is by people instead of just about those people. That's a really good rule of thumb, and it's not the only thing. You also want to look for stories that are really focused on the underlying humanity of the characters within the story and expressing a story that is essentially human and not just emphasizing the differences and the fantastical nature of these differences. You want to be looking for a story that is about the human experience and reminds us of our similarities and doesn't just reinforce our differences. So for us, the first time that we kind of came in contact with a single story, it wasn't actually with our DID diagnosis. We were diagnosed with retinitis pigmentosa a year before we got our DID diagnosis, and that means that our eyes are slowly failing us and we will eventually go blind, which is terrifying, especially as painters. But it was made even more terrifying because when we were coming to our diagnosis, we had this single story in our head about what blindness meant, and it was really a story of limitation and helplessness, and it was just really sad. And so we were just terrified and devastated, and we were just looking at our future, thinking about everything we wouldn't be able to do, and it was paralyzing. And the way that we got out of that mindset of just thinking that we're doomed and this is going to ruin us is we got out there and we started reading more stories by blind authors and connecting with different people in that community and doing as much research and read as many stories as we could. I have a great example here with me. This is Ryan Knighton's Come On Papa. And Ryan Knighton is amazing. He is an author and a professor, and this is just his book about becoming a parent. And it's a beautiful human story about fatherhood, and that's a scary thing for everyone, to become a parent. And it's really a beautiful story. So that's how you get out of the single story, is you just start reading and looking for more stories and more art by people from that community. And that's how you get out of it. So when we got our DID diagnosis, our husband was very wonderful, and he kind of knew, and we knew what it was that we needed to do to get out of it, which was to just start reading stories by people who were plural. And so he got us a bunch of books. He's just so wonderful. We call him Fish. That's his nickname. It was his nickname before we met him, so we didn't give him this nickname. It's just the nickname he came with. But so we're gonna have a little book review of all these different books. This was actually just the first. This was the first book that came in the mail. And it's not actually, this is a self-help guide, so it's not exactly art. But the story that is in it is so beautiful because the authors of this self-help book, it's a system and their partner. So Karen Marshall is the system and Tracy Allerman is their partner. So that right away, we were like, oh. And at that moment in our life, we were so devastated by our diagnosis of DID, and we had so internalized the single story about what DID means that we were really feeling unlovable, and we were feeling like we were ruining Fish's life by being us and by existing in general. It was just an incredibly hellish place to be in emotionally. And this book came in the mail, and we sat up on our porch and we had a cup of tea and we started flipping through it. And it was pre-owned because this book is really hard to come by. I don't think it's out of print, so Fish got it for us used. And we were flipping through, and there's only one section in this book that's highlighted, and it's the section towards the back, which is for partners of DID systems. And immediately that sort of struck a chord with us, and we were like, oh my God, this book was owned by someone who loved someone like us and who was looking to support their partner. And that really was something we needed to hear at that moment in our life, that people could still love us, that people could still love people like us. So the first thing that this person had highlighted, where is it? All my sticky notes are gone. The first thing that this person has highlighted was, you did fall in love with at least part of your partner. There's just more to your partner than you planned. And we read that and we just immediately started crying, and we were flipping through. And he highlighted like a whole paragraph. And the paragraph is about a woman, Teresa, coming out to her parents about being with someone with DID. And the paragraph he highlighted goes, when I initially began dating my partner, I called my parents and told them all of the wonderful things about her. Since she had been a part of my life for a long time before we started dating, they were really happy. In the same conversation, I said something like, I know that you may not approve of our dating because she has multiple personality disorder, but I don't really care. I like her very much, and we're going to date anyway. And in the margin, he wrote, wow. And we didn't know that wow was going to be one of the most profound love poems we had ever read in our entire life, but it was, and it still is. And he highlighted a lot of things, and it just meant so much to us at that moment. And the last thing he highlighted is towards the back of the section where there's activities, and he circled activity 10.5, learning how to be sexual. And that made us start laughing. And so we were laughing and crying at the same time, and Fish came out to the porch to see if we need more tea, and we were just a mess. And he was like, are you okay? And I don't think we got anything coherent out. We just said something like, he loved her so much. So, because we were already imagining the person who wrote in the margins as like someone like Fish, and the partner that they were supporting as someone like us. So we think of the person who wrote in the margins as the man in the margins, but we have no idea. It could have been a woman. So yes. And that was a story that we hadn't heard. That story about this person loving a system and loving someone who was plural really flew in the face of the single story that we had internalized over the course of our whole life. And that story, I mean, it had really kept us in denial for far longer than we ought to have been. Mostly because we thought if we were, we would not be lovable. And that's really sad. And it's not at all true. So if you are feeling like that, know that it is not at all true. Next on the docket. This one is by the Troops for Trudy Chase, and it is When Rabbit Howls. And as a disclaimer, this book is very hard to read. There's a lot of very graphic descriptions of the abuse that they went through as a child, including CSA. So it was very hard for us to get through, and we don't want to recommend it without giving a proper trigger warning. But even though it was really difficult for us to get through, and we had to take a lot of breaks from it, we really loved this book, and we still recommend it very highly. Their writing style was one of the first things that we really loved about it, because it's really all of them that are writing it, and there's 99 of them. No, 98 of them. 92. I'm horrible at numbers. 92 of them. So they're a larger system, and they're very co-conscious, and the narrative voice is just sort of, it's not a very clear narrative voice, and it felt very familiar for us, because when we're writing, it's very hard for us to have a very clear, singular narrative voice. Because it just doesn't come naturally to us. That's not how the internal monologue of our life works, because we are co-conscious and there's a lot of different perspectives being thrown in all of the time. And so the narrative voice just feels like it kind of shifts around from person to person constantly. And it was so refreshing to read that and to be able to see ourselves in the way that it was written, which was just so, it was like the first time we'd ever really encountered that, and it was kind of bizarre. I imagine that it makes it kind of hard if you're not a very co-conscious system, or if you're a singleton, to read it, because it's a bit like, who's talking right now? But for us, we're just like, oh, this sounds like our head. This sounds exactly like how we live our lives all the time. And we loved it. We just loved it. And another reason that we love the troops, they're just incredibly powerful people. They did a lot of advocacy against CSA and talking about CSA survivors and getting them help, and talking to the people who work with CSA survivors, and kind of talking with first responders about how to recognize signs that maybe that's what's going on in the home. So they just did a lot of really amazing work in their life, and they're really powerful, beautiful people. And another reason we really, really, really love them and feel that all systems owe them an incredible debt is because the troops were the first system that was in the public eye to say that they didn't want to integrate, that it was not their choice. And so if you are a system who chooses to integrate, that's great, and I support your decision, and I think it's a beautiful decision to make. But I do also think it should always be a choice. And the troops were the first to say that, to say, no, like, we don't want to integrate, and it should always be a choice whether you integrate or not. So if you choose to integrate, that's great. It should be a choice, and I'm glad that it is your choice. And if you choose not to integrate, that's also great. You don't have to. So they're the first. And yeah, I love them for that too. And it's so amazing to me that they chose that when they were such a large system, and like it wasn't necessarily easy to be them, but they were like, no, this is who we are, and we love all of us, and we're going to live how we decide. And so heartwarming, so brave. Really love them. And the next one, my books kind of got jumbled, is it's a fellow artist. This is Kim Noble's book, All of Me. And they're really amazing. They were also big advocates, and their paintings are really beautiful. And they're so diverse. Like, the different stuff that they do is just incredible. Their system is very different. And I think that's what's really nice when you start to get out of that single story of what a system looks like and what plurality means, is you very quickly see just how diverse the experiences are within the community. Their system is not at all like how our system works. It's not at all like how Trudy Chase's system, the Troops for Trudy Chase's system works. So their system is 100% zero co-consciousness and zero memory sharing, zero knowledge sharing. And it's so intense to the point that 3 of them all had their own flats at one point. So Patricia, Haley, and Bonnie all had separate residences. Haley and Patricia had their own separate flats, and then Bonnie was living with their mom. And none of them realized this. And Patricia's actually the one that wrote this book, and she's in her writing about it, she was just kind of laughing, like, oh my gosh, think of the money that we could have saved if we had all just shared a flat. But yes, it's very incredible. And ultimately, this story, apart from their talking about their artist career and all of that, it is also just a story about a family, because they had a daughter, Amy, and a lot of the story is about how they had to fight for custody of Amy and the right to raise her, because that was challenged due to their plurality. And so they had to go to the courts and say, no, we are capable of doing this. We can do this. And they won, and they got to raise their daughter, and it's just, yeah, all of them love their daughter so much, and it's such a beautiful story. So highly recommend this. And the other thing that's really nice about this one is that while they do touch on some of the abuse a bit, it's not nearly, they don't talk about it as much. So it's much easier to get through from that trauma standpoint as well. And that kind of brings me to a thing that is a bit hard when you're trying to break out of the single story of plurality as a plural, because a lot of the stories that are out there are very trauma heavy, and it makes it difficult sometimes to actually read the story. I actually have some other ones here. I haven't gotten into these ones, but yes, there are more. There's lots and lots of stories out there by plural authors, so you should definitely go out and find them all. But this one is by Cameron West, first person plural, and I had heard that there is a lot of trauma in this one, so I've been kind of avoiding reading it, or we have been avoiding reading it. And then A Mind of My Own by Chris Sizemore. Chris Sizemore is the system that Three Faces of Eve was based off of, a movie back in the 50s. And so the movie is about her, and this one is by her. I have not actually gotten around to reading it though, so I feel rather guilty about that, but it exists and you should read it. There's lots of books by plurals. But, so saying it is a bit hard to find stuff that you can read that isn't going to be triggering. That's something that we've found a bit difficult. But we have found some things. And this is so important because you need things that the kids can read too. Just like you need art that the kids can appreciate. Okay. I really, 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 really love these books and this artist, and I am just so happy that I get to share them with you because these are just so wonderful and I love them so much. It's Dear Little Ones by Jade Miller. Jade Miller is a polyfragmented system, and I love this. This is such beautiful art. It's so wonderful, and it explains DID in a way that that the system kids can understand, and it's so loving and so beautiful and gentle. We really needed this. We found this at a time in our life when we really needed to hear it, and we really needed a way to talk to our system kids about all of this, and we found it. We found it, and we got to read it, and we just feel so blessed that it exists and that we found it in the nick of time. We found it when we needed it. So I'm just going to read you a couple little parts. I really like this part. This one is about, I'm going to read two parts. This part is about persecutors, or the persecutor types. And it says, sometimes there are people on the inside who seem kind of scary. They might be angry or loud or bossy. Even though they look scary, they are just trying to help. They are helping in the only ways that they know how. Try to be nice to them, even if they don't seem friendly. They are hurting too, and need to know that they are valuable too. In time, as people are nice to them, they will feel better and learn other ways to help and how to be friends. we really needed to hear that message. And I think in a lot of ways, that message in particular, sort of influenced and informed how we reached out to one another and how we saw each other. And I'm not saying that this is necessarily 100% responsible for how we ended up treating one another, but I do think that it helped. And there was actually this sort of event that happened in our system history. And Phyllis actually has a drawing. Let me see. So we were in a very scary, dark place, and there was this sort of big bad system member that nobody really knew anything about, and he seemed quite scary, and this was a drawing of him. It's like very dark. He's like creepy, dark shadow puppet master. And the reality was that he was just someone who was really hurting and had been hurting for a long time and was carrying a lot of really heavy stuff for us. And Phyllis just decided that we were not those people, that we were not the kind of people to shut people out or lock people up, and we were not the kind of people to be afraid of people, especially people who lived in our system and who were a part of us. And if they lived in Emmengard, then they were as much an Emmengardian as any of us. They were just as real as any of us were. And so she did this incredibly brave thing, and she just reached out to him and offered him tea and to talk about whatever it was that he needed to talk about. She really was so incredibly brave in that moment, just this little girl standing up in front of this demon and just being like, I'm not afraid of you. And she meant it. So it really kind of saved our system in a way, and he ended up getting the help that he needed, and he is just a wonderful, beautiful human being, and we all love and admire him and respect him. And yeah, we draw a little comic sort of about him. We call it Jay the Shadow. So if you want to check that out, it's kind of about him. So Jay. So yes, we kind of got that from this, and that message that inspired our kiddo to be brave and to be the kind of person that reaches out in love and reaches out in the face of her fears. And we are just so proud of her. And yeah, and again, so blessed, so grateful to have this in our life. Okay, next little thing is about agency, which I think kids need to hear. Okay. When your big brothers or sisters find a helper on the outside who is safe, ask them when you can have a turn to talk to the helper. You do not have to talk to them unless you want to. You can watch a while until you feel ready. They mean help. When they say helper, they mean therapist. So cute. You can choose what feels safe to you. Being able to make a choice is very important. You couldn't choose when scary things were happening in the past, but you can choose now. You have a voice. She has a little microphone. I really think it's important for system kids to hear that they get to choose when they talk about things, or if they talk about things, and who they talk to, and that sense of agency. System kids really, really need that, because I think a lot of the reason why they ended up becoming system kids in the first place is because they didn't have agency at different points in their lives. At least that's how it kind of has worked for our system kiddos. So yes, these books, there's actually 3 of them, but we only have 2 of them. I don't know why. But yeah, they are all very good. I highly recommend them. Our system kids read these all the time. These are like their favorite books. So just read them on a loop. And this one, this is the first one that I'm recommending that is not by a plural author. This one is by E.L. Konigsberg. And if you do not know who that is, she's the person who wrote The Mixed-Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler, and she's just a very famous children's author. And her writing style is beautiful, and she must have done a massive amount of research when she did this book, because it feels very, I don't know, it feels very genuine, it feels very accurate, and it's a very human story. It's the story of George, who is the inside system mate, and Ben, who I guess is the one who just does all the fronting, but George can also speak sometimes through Ben, or in his own voice, really. And so yeah, it's about George and Ben, and also their little brother Howard, who is the only other person in the world besides Ben who knows about George. And it's about Ben and George kind of growing up and trying to figure out how to have friends and how to be cool, because they're 6th graders, and it's basically the story of their first fight. So it's a story about friendship, and it's really cute. And they even get diagnosed with schizophrenia, like misdiagnosed with schizophrenia, so that's very interesting as well. I really do think that E.L. Konigsberg must have done a massive amount of research before she wrote this. But it's one of her lesser known works. Like no one knows about this book, but it is really great. I always recommend it, even though it is a kid's book, I always recommend it to systems, even if they don't have system kids in them. Like most 2-person systems that I meet tend to be like 2 adults, and I'm still like, read George, it's really good. I think you're gonna like it. But it's also great for larger systems, because there's just a lot of things that are really familiar, and it's a really cute story, and any kid can read it. It's not triggering. I don't think there's anything really triggering in here. I mean, there is some I guess there's some sort of drama later on, because it's still like a novel, and so they have to be like, ooh, scandal. Maybe like a 6th grader, because they're 6th graders, so about that level. What was that, PG? PG. So yeah, those are like most of the books that I have to recommend here, and I guess it's time for us to show you all of our art. I do have one painting here with me. I was going to talk about it when I was talking about our RP diagnosis, but I guess I'll talk about it now because I forgot to. I didn't tell you guys, but I am the biggest space case of Emmengard, and there's 22 of us. So I'm the biggest space case of 22 people. I'm a bigger space case than all of the kids. That's really embarrassing. But yeah, so I forgot to talk about this. This one, let's see if I can back up a little bit more. Not really. No. It's really tall. And there's a top flower. Okay. So this one is very dear to me. Sometimes when things go not the way you planned, you really need art to get you through. And this is a painting that got me through some really dark times after we got our RP diagnosis. This was the first painting that I painted for me, because when we got the RP diagnosis, we were in the middle of a commission, and so I just finished the commission. But after the commission was done, I decided I was just going to take the night, and I was just going to paint something just for me. And I painted this. I just put all of my grief out into this canvas, and it turned out really beautifully, but I do think it's also rather sad. It's kind of a sad painting. So yeah, art doesn't have to be something that makes you feel happy either. It just has to be something that feels real. And just trust that. If it feels real to you, trust that and keep doing it. Other people will see that. And they will respect it. And some people, they'll see it and they'll get it. It will speak to them too. Okay. I'm going to take you into the back. Let's see. I'm going to just pause you. Hello. Still Elowen. And I am here in our studio at the back of our house, and it is very cold because there was a blizzard today, which is why I was actually recording in our living room, because it was very windy and noisy back here, and also cold because this house is 100 years old, and this little room on the back of it is not very well insulated, and it gets very cold very quickly, so I'm actually kind of shivering. But behind me, I have this painting of Emmengard, and Emmengard is actually what we call our mindscape. So we took our system name from that, but yeah, it is just a place. And this is one of the only paintings we actually ever made of it. Well, there's also this one. I made this one all the way back in middle school or maybe early high school. And there is a plains that looks like this in our mindscape. And this is actually Jack's, which is kind of crazy because we were not aware of each other at that time. We were still in denial, but I could still kind of see the others. Like, I was a big daydreamer, which is probably why I'm such a space case. And yeah, I could see Jack's, and that I painted them. And it was very awkward when people would ask me, oh, who's that in the painting? And I was like, well, I don't really know, because it didn't feel right to just say that she was made up. That felt like a not truth, because she is real. And even in the denial period, it still just felt wrong to say it. I don't know why. I couldn't say it. I couldn't just say she was just no one or made up or whatever. And I also knew she wasn't me, because I just knew she wasn't me. But that didn't make any sense either, and she wasn't a person in our real life either. Like, she doesn't look like anyone that we know. We kind of have red hair right now because it's dyed, but we naturally have blonde hair, and I have blonde hair, and at that time I had blonde hair, so yeah, it wasn't really me, and it didn't look like me, but the closest I came to was, I don't know, sort of me. So that was what I ended up saying. And this is a similar thing that happened with this one. I painted this one after I came back from university, the summer between freshman and sophomore year of university. And that is August and sky that I painted. And this is actually kind of my, I have like my own little weird dimension. And it's a sort of like a weird mirror dimension where like the entire surface of the dimension, like the floor of the dimension, is sort of like really still water that you can walk on, and then it just reflects everything, and it's just like a very big blue place, and I like to go there and think about shapes. I use it to help me when I'm painting. I'm gonna put this down here so we can see this one back here a little bit better. Yeah, I'll take you over. Hopefully my hands are not so shaky. This one is a painting that Bjorn and Sky did for our very good friends, Avtondale. And it is Bluebird Lake in their mindscape, and in the middle of it is a house with a rainbow trees. And yeah, a bunch of their system kids live there. What else? Oh, this one is a very massive painting. Sorry. Okay. And it is not finished because this one isn't finished because I struggle with architectural kind of shapes. I like forests and people and organic shapes. And so me and this painting, we do not exactly get along, which is unfortunate. Oh, okay, there, phew, he's set down. Okay, this is a very large painting, as you can see. If I stood it up the other way, it's almost as tall as it is. It's like 5 feet by 4 feet, so not about 5 feet tall, which makes, when I paint them the other way, then they're very tall. But, yeah, this is the door room in the mindscape of one of our very good set of friends, Chizen Dracoris. And they're on Reddit, and they have this door room in their mindscape that's just a huge, massive white room where they can manifest furniture sometimes. And then all of the doors to all of their different worlds, because everyone in their system has their own dimension or world, all of their doors are sort of floating magically on the wall, and they only come down to like floor level when like someone needs them. So it's really cool, and I really wanted to try to capture like the majesty and enormity of this door room. So it's a work in progress, it's not done. What else? Oh, then there's this one. Okay. This painting is extremely special to us, and it's actually the very first system painting that we painted. Before we painted Emmengard, we painted this, and the story behind this is just very dear to my heart. We were early on in our discovery, and we were really, needing people to connect with and talk to. And someone on Reddit posted, "Hi, I'm just looking to talk to anyone, and if you're open to talking to me, I could really use someone to talk to. Feel free to direct message me." And so we did, and we got talking about our mindscapes and about our systems, and it was such a surreal and amazing conversation, and it was so intense. We talked to them back and forth for 3 days, and when you took that conversation and copy pasted it out into a Word document, it added up to 36 pages single space of conversation back and forth. And it was really well matched on both sides. Like, we write a lot, and they also were writing a lot. So it was really amazing. And they are still some of our very best friends in the world. They're Nibiru, and this is their mindscape. And they had asked us to describe ours, and so we described our enormous mindscape, which is like basically a whole planet, and we just kind of keep to one province in it. And it also has like magic doors and things that open to different dimensions, but it's very green and verdant, and there's just trees and foliage and weird animals that Phyllis invents everywhere. And that's Emmengard. And so then we were like, well, what about you guys? What do you guys have? What does your mindscape look like? And they described to us something that sounded very stark and kind of barren. And so we kind of asked them, like, oh, that sounds really stark and barren, kind of empty. Like, how do you guys feel about that? Like, comparing it to our luscious inner world. And Tote, it's actually Thoth, but they're Irish, so they say it Tote. Tote got back to me, and he said that it didn't feel barren. It felt actually like a very spiritual place. It was like climbing a mountain and getting to the top and there being nothing between you and the sky. And I loved that. I loved that so much. And so I just started pumping him for details. Like, what kind of colors are in your mindscape? Like, what does the sky look like? I need to know everything about your mindscape now. And so I just pumped him for details, and he gave me a lot, which is really good and ended up being extremely helpful. Basically, it's kind of this place where time seems like it's moving backwards in fast forward reverse. So it's going really fast but backwards, and you're the only, you're kind of standing outside of time, and the only other thing that is in the same time that you are is this tree, which then sort of stands out against everything with this weird sort of electricity, because everything else is moving and evolving around it. And it's not, and you're not. And everything is just changing and shifting and evolving, and the colors in the clouds and in the sky are constantly shifting and evolving and changing. So it was just so beautiful. And there's a forest, there's in the distance, there's a forest of rocks, and in the far distance these sort of sand dune looking mountains. So yeah, right after speaking with Toth, I got off the internet and started painting this. So they are very dear to me. This painting is very dear to me. And it's sort of, I don't know, when you sort of suspend your authority over everything and you make room for a little bit of wonder and magic and art in your life, I think some really amazing and beautiful things start to happen. And I think kind of one of the beautiful things that ends up happening is it makes room for wonder, and it makes room for you to realize just how infinite the human soul is. And when you make room for that and you begin to see that, not only do you realize that you are infinite, you get to realize that everyone around you is infinite too. And that's just so beautiful. And it's like Remy says everything the best. You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a single drop. So yeah, I think that's what we're gonna end on. I really love Inner Worlds because it does sort of reinforce the infinity of the human soul. And I love hearing about other people's inner worlds, and I love painting them. It's definitely a passion of mine, and I hope that you enjoyed this, and I hope that you go out and make beautiful art too, and then go on and share it with others. Keep doing you.